March 2007, James Ash was found dead in his burning bungalow. Lincolnshire police deemed the fire had been started deliberately and launched a murder investigation. They appealed in the local media for information and searched the local river, but as the paper said, who was James Ash? He was believed to have lived in the Boston area for over 20 years, ran a carpet shop in the High Street, worked at Asda and a few care homes in the area, and in the 60s was a cabaret performer. This was the Boston Standard, serving Boston and the surrounding area. The River Welland to the south being the usual cut-off point for news and circulation. Interestingly, the 1980s were only fleetingly mentioned, with him running a carpet store in High Street, Boston. But in the early 80s, it is understood he worked in Peterborough and did have property interests in Gedney. 2 Stonegate Gedney is understood to have been sold by him in late 1987, and on the 21st of January 1989 he was to open a furnishing store in a building at a garage on High Road in Whaplode. James had been in the theatre, and many said he was a theatrical person. The new shop had a theatrical feel, and everything had to be right. Money appeared no object, with a builder, electrician and a plumber revamping the building. Centre of the shop was a specially built revolving carpet display, and in the 3 weeks before opening there was half-page adverts in the local press. Even the shop appeared to have a stage name, Michael James, but the shop was not that successful. By June of '89, the builder, who had done considerable work at the shop and at his house, 2A Stonegate, received a letter from a solicitor stating that Mr. Ash had put his property at 2A Stonegate Gedney and 42 High Street Boston on the market, and enclosing a cheque for £1,500 in partial settlement of the £8,249.10 currently owed by Mr. Ash, and the solicitor thought there would be sufficient funds in the sales to pay out the monies owed, subject to them receiving it. 2A Stonegate was advertised for sale by a local estate agent in the Lincolnshire Free Press. At the end of June 1989, the asking price in the region of £38,000, but ultimately the builder was not to be paid by Mr. Ash, neither was the electrician. It is understood the plumber sold an antique boiler that Mr. Ash wanted removing from the shop to offset some of his losses, and the maker of the revolving carpet display returned to the shop and took it away, as he had not been paid either. The letter from the solicitor mentioned a company called Lavermore Limited. Neither the builder or the electrician had heard of this company before receiving the letter from the solicitor. The company was incorporated on the 23rd of September 1988, with a registered office in Priestgate in Peterborough. 5th of April 2007. Lincolnshire police are appealing for information about James in his former hometown of Keighley, West Yorkshire, about 120 miles away from his Boston home. They were trying to trace James's former co-star and described him as theatrical and flamboyant, and stated the pair were a cabaret act on the Northern Circuit and in London before Mr. Ash moved to Boston to run a carpet store. But 15 miles away in Spalding, the press made no mention of Mr. Ash's death or any appeals by the police for information, even though it was this paper that covered stories from Whaplode and Gedney and was circulated around the area where he had his store and his former home, and had advertised his soft furnishings showroom. 18th of April, Boston Standard. Enquiries continue to find James's killer. Police have still not found evidence of a motive for the murder, and officers are carrying out a detailed search of the property. Detective Superintendent Roger Bannister said, "We now believe Mr. Ash worked as a taxi driver for two firms in the Boston area around 1990. Boston Standard, May the 2nd. Police are appealing for more help to catch James's killer." The article was also to announce that James's body had been released for burial, and the funeral would take place at Skirbeck Church. James had given strict instructions about his funeral before he died, apparently checking everything was in place only a few weeks before he died. As to whether this was because he was planning a suicide bid, or he had had a premonition that something was going to happen to him, or whether it was just by chance, it is not known. James was openly gay and was apparently devastated in April 1990 when a young man who he had affections for hung himself at the age of 20. Apparently after his death, James went and reserved a burial plot at the same cemetery so he could be nearby his friend. He also wished for his funeral service to be conducted at the same church, apparently much to the disgust of the dead man's family. At the funeral were several police officers in plain clothes. One officer was to note a person who he did not know, and was to ask that person what he was doing there. After a brief exchange, he was to tell the officer about 2A Stonegate and 42 High Street, Boston, and the builder not receiving any proceeds from the sale. The reply from the officer was, he never did own 42 High Street, Boston. The person then asked if the officer would like a copy of the letter, to which he replied he would, and the following week a copy of the letter was sent to Sleaford Police Station, where the murder inquiry was based. May the 16th, Boston Standard. Murder hunt police in appeal for new facts. The report was also to appear in the Keighley News on the 17th of May. New police plead for murder information. Mr. Ash, a single man, managed a hairdressing business at 143 Skipton Road in Keighley in the late 70s. It is believed he lived above the salon, and at the time may have used his mother's maiden name, Keane. It is thought he managed the business in 1976-77, and we think it closed around 1979. They were now keen to trace his former business partner, Roger. There is still much to be done in relation to this murder inquiry, and we remain committed to bringing those responsible to justice. The investigating team is leaving no stones unturned, and that's why it's important to trace anybody who had dealings with him. This is a complex inquiry, made challenging because James really did seem to keep himself to himself. The builder, who received the letter from the solicitor regarding James Ash and the money he was owed, was interviewed by the police, as was the electrician. There was never any mention of the carpet business at Whaplode or the property at Stonegate. The two papers circulated from Spalding, the Lincolnshire Free Press published on a Tuesday, and the Spalding Guardian, published on the Thursday, were not to mention Mr. Ash's death or any police appeal for information. Yet, the following week, they was running a shopping feature on Boston. Soon afterwards, the investigation was scaled down. In December 2007, at the Coroner's Court, Detective Superintendent Roger Bannister was to argue that he thought Mr. Ash's death was suicide. However, South Holland-based station manager Kevin Baker did not feel that Mr. Ash had started the fire himself. He was to confirm, however, that petrol was poured inside the house and not poured through the letterbox as first thought. The court was told that a petrol can found near the house contained the same brand of petrol as found in Mr. Ash's lawnmower, and the handle contained traces of Mr. Ash's DNA. In a statement, one of his brothers had said, "James always wanted the world to pay attention to him and to make a statement." It was also stated that he had tried to take his life twice before, and he was fixated with a young man who took his life in 1990, often talking as though he was in the room with him. With a lack of any firm evidence as to who had started the fire, an open verdict was recorded. The letter from the solicitor and the matter of him owing money was not mentioned. With the police's change from murder to suicide, did the police want to keep this quiet, and if so, why? If they did investigate it, would they bring something out into the open which they'd rather not?